Welcome back to the virtual hangar. Our summer reading challenge this year is camping themed, so today we are going to learn how to make this super cute Amigurumi Bear. Your kit will include one ball of tan brownish yarn, one small length of black yarn, a big pile of polyfill stuffing, two safety eyes. It's going to come in two pairs like this of the little black piece and the little plastic pieces. One safety nose, which looks like the safety eyes, but you can see it's got that triangle shape and its backing. One yarn needle. Two stitch markers that look like safety pins. One 3.5 millimeter hook. And one paper pattern. Now, if you have never crocheted before, I highly recommend you go back and watch the Crochet Coffee Cozy video. I go over the details of how to do like the single crochet and the chain stitch much more slowly. I'm going to have to gloss over them a little bit for this video to get to the new stuff. So go ahead and go back for that if that's your first ever project. So let's go over how to read this pattern. Most patterns will have at the top a list of the materials you need to make the pattern and then the abbreviations of the stitches used in the pattern. So SC, single crochet, ST just means stitch, SL, ST means slip stitch, SC, two together means decrease one by working two single crochets together. We'll get to that at the end, don't worry about it yet. It'll show you legs, make two. It's gonna go on from the legs to the body. And then the nose and the ears are separate as well. We'll make one nose and two ears. Anytime there is the brackets at the end of my pattern here, that's how many stitches are at the end of that round. So at the end of round one, there are 6 stitches. When we get on to the next pattern, anytime there is instructions in parentheses, everything in the parentheses needs to get repeated however many times, and that will lead to however many stitches are at the end of the row. So 2 single crochets in the next stitch, we're going to do that 6 times. It'll be 12 stitches at the end of the row, and so on. We're going to start with our yarn cake here. You can pull from the end or from the outside. I have always pulled from the outside, but now that I've started making these yarn cakes, I actually like to pull from the middle. It's totally preference. It's up to you. Wherever you can find the end, go ahead and start there. The first part we're going to do here is called the magic ring. So we're going to take our 2 fingers, take the tail and pinch them between your first finger and your thumb, and then make an X right where your thumb is. So right where the yarn crosses, we're going to go under the loop of yarn we just made, pull our yarn up through that loop. I'm going to show you one more time, a little bit closer here. So we're going to take our hook, go under the loop, pull our working yarn through the loop, and then grab that cross, the pinch, with our fingers, hold it tight, and then yarn over through the loop we just pulled through to make our first chain. This is kind of an invisible stitch. I don't count it. Some patterns may, but I don't. So the benefit is this, is you can take that tail and pull the center loop of working in the round as tight as you want to. And that helps in amigurumi, especially so that you don't have any weird gaps. Kind of the name of the game in amigurumi here is to keep the fabric as tight as possible. It's all single crochets and it's very tightly done with the tension here. So when we start to single crochet, we do that into that center loop. And then once we get our first round done, we can pull the tail as tight as possible and get rid of the hole. So there's our first single crochet. So when you start counting, that's the one you would start from. And then you just keep working in that big loop we made from when we wrapped it around our fingers. Keep working single crochets into that loop, pulling the yarn through and making our single crochets. So that's 2. This is just a demonstration. So again, we're just going to work through the middle loop, make a 3rd single crochet, and continue on in that manner. Now, as we go through this video, I've included more subtitles, more headings so that you can see, oh, I need to make this stitch. I'm going to look for that subtitle. You noticed I did the magic ring one here at the beginning. And I'm going to try and do every row with the pattern so that you can skip around this video and come back. This is a stitch marker. It basically looks like a weird safety pin. I always mark the first stitch of every round on the pattern with a stitch marker. You just put it right under the top 2 loops of the stitches that you made, and then clip it on right like that. And that's how you know you got to the end of the round. This sort of pattern is going to take a really long time to make, I'm not going to lie. And sometimes it can be confusing of when you put it down on the coffee table next to the couch, what row am I on? What stitch am I on? So as long as you get in the habit of marking the first stitch in each round with a stitch marker, you will always be able to pick it back up. So here you can see I've done my 4. I'm going to start to tighten my center magic loop, magic ring. You can see how it gets smaller. And then I'm going to continue to work in that loop and make my 6 single crochets for the first row. So look here, this is what makes the magic ring so magical. We're going to take that tail and pull it, and then the hole there is almost completely gone. So here we go, row 2. We are going to make our first stitch, 1 single crochet. And remember, we're pulling quite tight, so it's a little bit difficult to pull the hook sometimes. So there's our first one. I'm going to put our stitch marker in the first single crochet, and then we are going to actually make another single crochet in the same stitch. This can also sometimes be written as an increase, but I tried to make the pattern as simple as possible for beginners, even though this is kind of an advanced technique. So we're going to do 2 single crochets in the same stitch 6 times, so that will give us 12 stitches all the way around. So we're going to really quickly finish the rest of that round. And here we go, on to the third round. Now this time, you can always, when you get to the end of the row, count your stitches and make sure that you've got, like I said, 12, so great. Now we're here on 18. We are going to do 1 single crochet in the first stitch, and then mark that with our stitch marker. And then in the second stitch, we'll do 2 single crochets. So once you kind of get the hang of how these patterns are written, how this sort of round crocheting in the round technique works, the legs are going to start, you're going to be really intimidated, but by the time you get to the ears and the nose, you will be old pros. And we get to the end of row 3. That should be 18 stitches there. I'm going to take our stitch marker out, do our first stitch in the 4th row, and then a second stitch and 2 single crochets in that same next stitch. So over 3 stitches, you would have 4 stitches total. The first 2 would be 1 and 1, and then the next 3rd stitch, you would have 2 in the 3rd stitch. All right, row 5, here we go. We are going to do just 24 stitches all the way around. Up until now, we've made a pretty much flat disc. Once you start doing the same amount of stitches, you're not increasing any in each row, then the shape will kind of start to come up into a tube or a cylinder. So we're just going to do 24 stitches all the way around, rows 5 through 10, but in the video here, row 6 through 10. And what I do actually when I get to the beginning of a section like this where the rows are the same, I will keep the stitch marker on the first stitch of the first row that I started doing the repeated pattern. So these rows that all have 24 stitches, I'll leave the stitch marker on the first row of row 5, and then I will use the other stitch marker to continue marking the first stitch of whatever row I'm on. So I use the orange marker here to mark the beginning of row 6, the beginning of row 7, and I leave the blue one on the beginning of row 5 so that I know how many times I have done the 24 stitch row. So we are just about to the end of the first leg here. I'm going to show you how to fasten off. So you just pull the loop of the yarn through the loop that you're working in, trim it, pull it tight, and then go back to the beginning of the video and repeat these steps one more time for a second leg, because the bear should have 2 legs. We're going to do the exact same thing here with movie magic. We'll get to the end of leg 2. And instead of fastening off, when we get to the end there, we are going to take our stitch markers out and then take our second leg, and we need to join them. So we're going to do that with a slip stitch, and you should do it in the last stitch of the first leg you made. So you're just going to stick your hook in, yarn over, and pull the yarn through the first stitch, and actually also pull it through the loop that is already on your hook. So you're going to, once again, stick your hook in, yarn over, and then keep it. You do want to keep this part nice and tight because you don't want him to have a weird gap between his legs. So we are going to pull that loop, that yarn over through the stitch we're working in, as well as the yarn that is already on our hook. That's a slip stitch. So then we are going to just continue on with the body. The first row is 48 stitches, and it gets a little funny. As long as you get back to the orange marker with 48 stitches, you've done it. There's the middle where you're joining the legs. Remember, the goal here is to not have a weird gap. So if you get a little confused about how to get from one leg to the other, I promise, just keep going. So you can see here, this one's kind of like a little secret one. I did some counting and determined that I needed to put my hook in that one. So that is 48 stitches all the way around. So for row 12, I'm going to take that one out, keep going all the way around, and it'll be a little bit easier to see when I'm done with this row how the legs joined. I will zoom out a little bit so you can see a little better. Here we go. Once we are on the beginning of row 13, you can see the legs, how they join to become one. I am going to leave that orange marker at the beginning of row 12, and I just make a note of that on my pattern. We've got a long stretch here where we're just going to do 48 on every row all the way around. And the way that we remember we did that is by taking our orange marker. Okay, it starts at row 12, and then I'm going to count 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, all the way up to I've finished row 33. Now I'm on row 34. I'm going to put my stitch marker in after the first stitch. I'm going to do the first 6 stitches just regular, and then I'm going to show you how to single crochet 2 together. So we've got 1 crochet here, a 2nd crochet there. We are going to push our hook, instead of pushing through both loops, we're just going to push through the front one, and then we're going to go back down and push through just the front loop on the 2nd stitch that comes next. So we've done 6 singles. The next 2, stitch 7 and 8, we are going to put our hook through the first loop of stitch 7 and stitch 8. It's going to be quite tight. Do your best. And we are going to yarn over and pull the working yarn through both loops. The first couple are going to be tough. You'll get a hang of it. And then that we just finish as the same as our single crochet. We're going to yarn over and pull through both loops on the hook. So that's our single crochet 2 together. Anytime it says that, it means you're going to work in the next 2 stitches to turn them into 1 stitch. So we'll do 6 more single crochets, and then on the next 2 stitches, we'll do single crochet 2 together. And we are going to do that through the end of the row. Then the row will have 42 stitches, and the decreasing we're kind of going to do in the same manner as the increasing. We're just going to do 1 less every time. So I'm actually going to mark the front of this next row with the orange again, because that's the row that we started decreasing on. I could count every time, but I find it a little bit easier if I just remember, okay, that's where the orange one is, and then use the blue one to mark the beginning of each row. So I'm going to do 5 single crochets, and then I'm going to do 1 single crochet together to decrease. And get to the end, we'll do row 36 in the same way. We're going to do 4 single crochets and then 1 single crochet 2 together to decrease. At the end of that row, we will have 30 stitches. And we're almost to the next part. Here we are. We're going to add our eyes between row 31 and 32. So we know that we started decreasing in row 34, so I'm going to count down. That is the gap there between row 31 and 32. You can count stitches from the beginning of the row, but I actually just eyeballed it to be with the legs and kind of counted so that they would be about 11 stitches apart. And I'm just sort of pushing with my hook to get an idea of where to go. I actually ended up using a pencil to make the hole a little bigger because as you can see, the post on the safety eye is kind of thick. When we attach these, the hat is not going to go, it is going to go this way. It's not going to go this way like a cup, but it's going to go this way like a hat. We're going to do that on the back side of the fabric to attach the safety eye. So poke as best as you can through the fabric with the safety eye, and then you just push the cap on nice and tight with your fingers. Once we're done with that, it's the fun part. We are going to add stuffing. Go ahead and stuff it to your heart's desire. You may or may not use all of the stuffing that I gave you, but you do want to leave a little bit just for the nose later. And go ahead and push it farther down than you would think because it's going to get in the way while you're stitching. Once we got the stuffing in, we are going to go with row 37 and then row 38. We are going to do 2 single crochets and 1 single crochet together for row 38. And row 39. As we get to the ends here, we are decreasing almost every stitch. We're decreasing every other stitch for this one. It's going to be a little bit tougher your first time, but hopefully not too intimidating. The last row, we are going to single crochet 2 together every stitch. So we'll start from 12 stitches and we will get down to 6. And then we are going to, the same way we fastened off the one leg, just go ahead and pull that loop until it's just a string, and then even out the stuffing by giving it a good squish all the way around. I had a great time doing this part. When we've got our tail there, we're just gonna sew it by, this kind of helps seal the end. On the outside loop of each of the last row, we're gonna go from the middle to the outside on all 6 of those stitches. This helps keep the last hole in the fabric to be completely closed. So you're just going to kind of sew from the middle to the outside all the way through all 6 of those. Pull the tail tight and then go ahead and just stab your guy right in the middle with the needle and go down through his tummy. If you pull this tail tight and a little farther than you think it should go, when you trim it, just like that, when we trim that tail, boop, it just disappears. All right, we are going to start the ears. We're going to do the magic ring. If you need a refresher, go ahead and zip back to the beginning of the video. We are going to start the first row with 6 single crochets all the way around. Row 2 is going to have 2 single crochets in the next stitch 6 times around to end with 12. When we get to row 3, we are going to do 1 single crochet and then 2 single crochets in the next stitch. So we're going to do 1 and then increase 1 to get 18 stitches. Row 4, we are going to do 18 stitches all the way through row 7. So again, you can mark with the orange, the 2 stitches if you want to, the 2 markers, but for these little ones, because you have to make 2 and they work up pretty fast, I didn't really bother to do that, but you will ultimately end up with 7 rows. At the end, they'll all have 18 stitches, and we are there. We are going to fasten off 1. You can see how it kind of becomes ear-shaped, kind of like a closed thing. You want to fasten this off with a long tail, at least twice the length of the ear when it's closed. That way you don't have to use additional yarn later when we're attaching this to the body. Go ahead and make 2 of those and then move on to the nose. We're going to start again with the magic ring. We're going to start the first row with 6 stitches all the way around. Row 2, when we get there, we'll have 2, increase all the way around. So we'll do 2 single crochets in each stitch to get 12 stitches. Row 3, we're going to do a little bit differently when we get there. We're going to do 2 single crochets and then increase 1 by doing 2 in the same. So that'll give us 18. This is going to make the nose kind of more of an oblong shape, kind of an oval, instead of a perfect round, which might look a little silly. Row 4, we're going to do 3 single crochets and then increase 1 to end that row on 24 stitches. And then we are going to do row 5 and 6 are just going to have 24 stitches all the way around just to give it a little bit more length. When we get to the end of that, we are going to very carefully and scientifically measure the length of our tail to be at least twice the way around of our nose. Obviously, I did a great job measuring, but just make sure you leave enough so that you can use it to sew so you don't have to cut another one. Any more yarn. So I actually, in that same manner, attached the black yarn to the inner tail of the middle of the nose, just with a double knot because I don't like having to tie more knots than I have to. We are going to use that black yarn, thread a needle with it, and just embroider a little mouth. I went right through the center of the nose, down a little bit, over to the right, at kind of a 45-degree angle, and then on the other side the exact same, a little 45-degree angle. You could do another one if you wanted to give him a smile, which is what I ended up doing. So starting at the bottom point and going up at a 45-degree angle. And once I'm done with that, there's the front, you can see there. I take the safety nose and attach it right through what would have been the magic ring in the same way. We are going to do the hat on the nose just like that. And then our nose is ready to get attached to the body. So once you've got him all fluffed appropriately, anywhere you like, just between the two eyes, the tail will be at the top. So I just kind of centered it and eyeballed it. You are just going to stitch through the front, or you could stitch through the whole stitch, however you like, up through the top, through the middle, and then back to the outside again, all the way around the nose and the mouth. I went about halfway. You can see here a little better the way that you go from the front of the stitch to the last row of the mouth. And keep stitching. I stitched about 3/4 of a round and then left a little gap so that I could add the last little handful of stuffing that I had left over. Just so that the nose wouldn't be like weird and floppy. You just kind of stuff a little bit in there and then go ahead and get it all out of the way and continue sewing it on to the body. Really, there is some technique to this as you get deeply into amigurumi. If you find this is something that you really enjoy, there are a lot of really cool free patterns out there for you to find. I know this is really big on Instagram too. I'm just going to finish that by grabbing that stitch and then trimming it through the body in the same way that we did the head tail. And then here we go. I didn't stuff the ears. I just kind of laid them flat and laid them at about a 45-degree angle and made sure I tried to center it with these centers. So you could do it up higher, you could do it down low like that, but I just did a good 45 right in the middle. I wasn't trying to get fancy with it. I'm going to thread my needle with the tail from the ear and then sew in a straight line from the center through the stitches just like that, and then through both stitches front to back on the ear. So when I close the ear together, I'm getting the stitch on the front side and the back side, and then getting the stitch through the body, or the head, I guess, to attach the ear to the head. So we are just about there. When I get to the end, same thing. I just kind of like to secure it with a little, like, it's not even a knot. It's just kind of like a figure 8 where I catch the yarn on itself. And then to finish off that tail, we're going to do the same thing. Pass the needle through the body, pull it tight, and trim the tail so that it disappears. Once you are all done with the first ear, you go ahead and do the second ear in the exact same manner. And believe it or not, gang, that is just about the whole project. If you made it through to the end of the video, I'm so proud of you. Again, there are lots of cool patterns to get into with this style, but I hope that this was a nice, easy starter for you. If you are interested in amigurumi, totally come drop by the hangar. We can talk all about it. I would love to see what you make, and I will see you next time.